The two coyotes, in fact, almost like they kind of come from behind us. I mean, they were absolutely using that wind to try to get to some sort of vantage.
All right, everybody, last we left off with you, if you are listening to these in order, we were with Greg over at the Fur Harvesters Auction Inc., which is fairly local to us and really unique. So really, if you're curious about what goes on after you shoot a coyote, hopefully, if you're out there and you get lucky enough to see one and call one in, I mean, we're going to talk about our experience out there in the field, but that was a great podcast hearing about what happens after the fact. So, but if you listen to that and now you're wondering, hey, what happened with these guys when they went on their hunt? Well, you got Jimmy here, Mark to my left, and across the table for the first time on our podcast, we actually couldn't believe this, is Coop, the man behind the video camera when you watch the video stuff with our pod ventures. So, Coop, introduce yourself real fast.
Cooper Long, get the privilege to follow these guys around on the pod ventures. Love hunting, love being outside, so getting to chase these guys around, no complaints.
That's right. Yeah.
Opened up with a lie, Jim.
What's that now?
He opened up with a lie. Yeah, I get the privilege of following these guys around.
You know.
I know that, Coop.
Cooper is quite the trooper, and actually that rhymes. So, but he was the guy who was smushed into the back of the Subaru all the way out to Wyoming. But you did end up getting to shoot an antelope at least.
I did,
so
and it was awesome.
There is that. So yeah, sometimes Cooper even actually gets to step in front of the camera and pull the trigger. So, all right, now guys, we went to Nebraska. Obviously, there's coyotes around here in Wisconsin, but for whatever reason, we said nope. We don't want to shoot these ones right now. We want to go however far away it was, a 10-hour drive or something like that, into the, everywhere, admittedly, this last week when we were out hunting at the time of the recording of the videos. Everywhere was below zero, it seemed. Even if you were in Costa Rica, I swear it was below zero that week. But yes, very, very cold temperatures. We were in some unknown territory to us. Obviously, you do some map scouting, and you try and get the best idea of what's going on. We got access to some private land, which is pretty sweet. But, yeah, we hoofed it, and it was a pretty dang good experience. So we're going to tell you guys about that, maybe what we found to work, what didn't work, some of just kind of what all goes into it, I'd say. Say that's about right, Marco?
Yeah, I'd say that's spot on, Jim. And one thing about this, like I said, we drove cross country. We drove through a snowstorm. Apparently, driving through Iowa, I don't think we've ever driven through Iowa without like seeing just either being in inclement weather, like we always have been.
Yes.
Also, we've been fortunate, though, to be on the back end of it, or at least the brunt of it, because I've never seen more vehicles off the road ever in my life than like the 4 times I've driven through Iowa. It is a wasteland. I don't know what happens there. It's the Bermuda Triangle of vehicles going off the road. Trucks.
It is.
I mean, 4-wheel drives, regular cars, semis.
It's upside down sometimes.
Upside down. Off. I mean, I hope everybody's okay. Semis crossing the median.
Coop used to live in Iowa.
I did.
Is this just a regular occurrence here?
I feel like it seems to be a winter thing for sure. I mean, I spent about a year and a half in southern Iowa or whatever, so I did get to experience that, especially on my trips home. And every snowstorm, it seems to be like 100 semis, cars in the ditch, rolled over. It's, like you said, I don't know if it's a natural phenomena that occurs there, but it's definitely a part of Iowa.
Maybe some of our listeners from Iowa can attest to this, can explain what it is that's going on when these winter storms happen. Because when you drive around here and other places I've been to, usually you see a car here and there. But there's something about Iowa. It looks like a used car lot on the side of the road.
Man, it is crazy. It makes a person worry as they travel along. But yeah, like we're talking about, did it make, to the untrained eye, does it make sense to drive a touch over 10 hours to go chase coyotes that you could maybe drive 10 minutes and chase at home? And I say, Jim, sometimes things don't have to make sense. It just has to sound fun.
Yeah.
It sounded more fun.
Yeah, for whatever reason it did. And it was quite fun. So we went out there just with the intention of trying to shoot even just one. Mm-hmm. We weren't trying to stack them up or anything like that. Obviously, the more the merrier. But yeah, we went out with the intention of shooting just one. I had, in terms of gear that we were taking with us, the nice thing about coyote hunting is that you don't have to have, like, well, when you're coyote hunting in that weather, we did have a lot of gear. I mean, mostly the
Oh, yeah.
clothing, tons of layers, stuff like that. But you basically go out with, the pack wasn't loaded up with a ton of stuff. I had a pack with some basic super emergency cold weather stuff in it. And then you got your rifle. And, I got to use an AR that I'd built a long time ago. I was really excited to finally go hunting with this AR as an 18-inch. Mark, you were using one of our sort of PRS-built guns. You were using the one I built, actually. It's a little bit lighter than yours.
Yep.
Still not light by any means.
No. And then, of course, like last minute, I don't know, dude. I mean, classic, right? Well, I was going to use a different rifle.
Right.
That actually would have been really, really, not that yours wasn't nice to use, but it was a little heavy, a little clunky. And then we thought we had a sling that worked with it, and then we ended up not having a sling that worked with it. So that was not the most fun thing to lug around. But you know what? It wasn't the end of the world either. But the original rifle, we just had some issues with it and couldn't quite sort it out, so I had to plan B it at the last second, and luckily we had an accurate rifle that could have worked if needed.
That's right. Now let's talk about the country that we were in, because Nebraska can look a number of different ways. It's actually a little bit more, I would say, diverse than people often give it credit for. People who are driving through it usually
Absolutely.
give it credit for. The area that we were in was more western, like the western side of the central side of part of.
Yeah, I'd say like north central-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah, west north central, kind of in there. We're in a lot of that Sandhills country.
Yeah. And the first day, we went to a spot that was very hilly, very much broken country.
Mm-hmm.
And then, on the second day, we were in some much more open country. It still was rolling, but it was a lot more open. We could see much, much further.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously, one thing, too, that we've mentioned now a couple times is how cold it was. And, let's talk about things that people will wonder, like, can you hunt a coyote in, for example, really hilly, really broken country, or do you need more open country? Can you hunt a coyote, and can you see anything when it's below 20 degrees Fahrenheit? Or, we were even looking up some stuff out there where people were saying basically if it's below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, give up, don't even go. What would you say there, Mark?
I don't know, man, because that was one of my concerns. I'm like, man, are these things going to be so cold that even if they hear that distress call, they might be cold and hungry, but they also, something is eating whatever's, got that, quotation mark dying rabbit, right?
Yeah.
So are they going to get in a fight? Are they doing a cost-benefit analysis? Like, now I'm going to run a mile. Now I might get into a fight. Now I might not even, by the time I get there, this thing might be gone. Yeah, I'm going to stay tucked into this hillside and just, wait this cold weather out until I can be a little bit more comfortable. So, and also, I guess my thought with that, too, is a lot of and this is just totally anecdotal, right? Like personal experience, but a lot of the high coyote activity, at least visually that I've seen when they're just like out and about, is kind of on the back end of a storm where it's been super stormy, super cold. They've been laid up, and then there's finally that break, and they're like, hooray, let's go catch mice. So I was a little concerned about it. So I was doing a lot of reading on that, and I mean, like you said, Jim, it can be pretty darn cold. They're still going to respond to the calls. They're still going to be active. They're still going to be doing their thing, as we witnessed while we're out there finally.
That's right. We didn't see many on day one. We were in the really broken stuff, though.
Zero. We saw a total of 0.
Exactly, 0. And it's hard to say why, because we're going around and like speak to the strategy a bit of our sets, right? Because when you're coyote hunting, for anybody who's really just never done it before, it's not like, I guess every different style of hunting has its own unique way of going about it. But you find a spot that you feel like there would be coyotes around, or that you can kind of see a funnel or some sort of a draw that the coyotes would make their way towards, where there would be this either some sort of a dying rabbit, or some sort of an animal in distress, or maybe even a coyote that they don't like being there, if you're going to use some coyote vocalizations. And you try and then set yourself up in the best spot where you're not going to get winded, but you can see this corridor or something that you think they're going to come through. Anyway, so you go throughout different sets. I think we had maybe somewhere around, what'd you say? Did we set 5 times?
Like five or six that day.
I'd say
probably.
5 or 6 for sure the first day.
Yeah, and this was somewhat unique. Maybe not that unique, but we had permission on a couple different adjoining pieces, right? And there was definitely enough country to walk around and hunt, but it wasn't so much that you couldn't cover it in a day. I think I've heard a rule of thumb, and I think that's about right. Like, you kind of want to have about a mile between sets, just to let it breathe a little bit, put some distance between your last one. And I think we were probably inside of that, but we were also in that really broken country with a lot of cover.
Yeah.
It was interesting to the way the sound was carrying. I didn't feel like it was actually carrying that far, which you think, oh, it's Nebraska, it's wide open. Again, these are just kind of like observations, so somebody might be listening to this right now and being like, oh, wrong. But don't comment below. But yeah, so we got a handful of sets in, and it was pretty rugged. I mean, pretty deep snow.
Oh, yeah.
Rugged country. Like you said, Jim, I think our approach was almost similar to how you would, in any other game animal, really. Like, find a place where they're likely to be, find a place where you can see a little bit so you can shoot, try and keep the wind in your favor, which I think that might have been one of our major challenges in there. The wind was a little bit fickle. I think
really
it was
swirly because of the
swirly
country.
And pulling up and down some of those draws and just not super consistent. So I think there's probably actually a high likelihood we were just getting busted.
And with how many hidey holes there were all around everywhere, and you're trying to, you got all your gear on because it's frozen out there. I mean, it is the tundra. Everybody's faces were just icicles out there.
As we're about to get out of the truck, and the truck said -18. I'm like, ooh, she's a bit nippy out there.
You're hiking around there. You got your big clumsy boots on. You got we're carrying these rifles around and stuff, and so you can't help but in a lot of ways make some noise. Especially in that broken country, there are times where we had to basically slide down small grassy cliffs essentially, or climb up them. So that definitely wasn't ideal. It was funny. We did see a fair amount of mule deer on that day one. And we saw
everything but coyotes.
Pretty much everything but coyotes. We even saw a turkey out in a field just grazing around, scratching around at the ground. Tons of turkey. And we saw lots of evidence of coyotes, though. There's a lot of tracks. And that was one thing that I would say we sort of would try to use for some of our sets. Now, obviously, you're listening to this and it's like, oh, well, we had this strategy. It didn't work. So why would you do that strategy? That's it. But, I mean, this is just some of our trial and error. If you can learn anything from stuff we tried that didn't work. And maybe the thing is, too, is it's hard to say if it never would work if you tried it, or if it's just that day at that time and that temperature or whatever. Who knows what?
Oh, I'm 100% confident we could go up in that same piece of country, and you could go up today, tomorrow, another time, and call some dogs. And I mean, they were there.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, we cut several sets of singles. We cut one double, and then that one was that 3. I think there was a group of 3. In that one set of tracks,
running through the snow.
There was you could tell that there was 3 running together. So.
Some of them were, especially we had the one set. So we came up on top of this hill. There was some open ag land that was between sort of 2 big tufts of trees and some really breaky stuff that went down at a pretty steep angle. We were on one side of it. There's a big open area between us where we saw those doubles headed over to the other side. And they were tucked down, and they were pretty fresh tracks. And we were almost certain that those coyotes were literally just maybe about 300 yards away, tucked down in that stuff. And I mean, we were ready. We had everything. Like, we were talking about, like, well, when they come out of there, you're gonna do this, or I'm gonna be here, you're gonna be there, all this stuff. And ultimately, no dice.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a few sets. Like I said, I think we did 5 or 6 where there were probably half of them where I was like, confidence level high, and half of them were like, well, you never know what's going to happen.
Right.
Could work, and sometimes I feel like that's when it works. You're like,
right.
Oh, this one's going to be garbage. Like, there's 7.
Yeah. We did also we started closer to the truck than far from the truck. We didn't, and one thing you said that resonated with me, I know, is you were like, well, why would you walk by coyotes in order to call coyotes? Like, there might be some pretty close by to where you are.
Yeah, and it was good country, some cattle ranching going on right there, so human activity and trucks and vehicles being where we parked and slamming doors or whatever. I mean, I don't think we were like intentionally slamming doors or anything like that, but I didn't feel like that was going to be like a huge negative, I guess. I could have seen, sometimes you do see coyotes in pretty close proximity to that ranching and things like that, so and like you said, why, so we kind of got to our first point where we could get up high, we could see down into the cedars. It was very, It was thick down in those draws, thicker than I thought it was going to be from the aerials.
Yep, absolutely.
You definitely could see less than I anticipated.
Yeah.
Which I think that could have been part of our problem. Or maybe we called 0 dogs in and that was it, or maybe we called 10 in and just never got a look at them before they winded us. I don't know, Coop. What are your thoughts? What were your observations?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you guys as far as the terrain. I mean, day one especially, with those real steep ravines like that, and the questionable wind you mentioned. I feel like we hunted it right. We hunted our way in, used the wind the best of our abilities, but at the end of the day, like you said, that bowl up there, I mean, who knows if that wind was swirling and we just couldn't tell. Like we said though, like I think it was our second set where we were up at a good high point and you could just see down in them ravines perfectly. It seemed like you said, all right, when he comes, he's going to be right here. And it just makes a guy wonder, if it is in fact that wind or, we just couldn't see so far. But I think we hunted it right, as best of our abilities at least.
Yeah, and I think you got to keep in mind too, and this is part of the fun, right? I think this is part of the reason why we were like, let's go to Nebraska, and I leveraged some connections. A buddy of mine back in my Cabela's corporate days, still had family in the area, gave him a ring. He's like, oh yeah, come on out, So and they were like super amazing, and even got us permission on some landowners that were adjacent to what they had, so we had a little bit more room to roam there, but we'd never set foot on this piece ever before, and I'll say this 100 times more probably, but everything is you have an idea when you get there, but when you are boots on the ground, it can be just a different world, and so we didn't know the country, so you got to learn the country again. Part of the fun. Are there some things that I'd do differently on that piece? Yeah, I'd probably actually come back. I'd come in. Starting out, I wouldn't do anything differently. I'd be like, yeah, we approached it. But I'd actually come in from the opposite side and start up high. And I think
instead of doing like we did, starting down low and making our way up.
That's exactly what I was thinking too.
I was thinking pretty much the exact same thing as well. I do think that would just seem to make more sense for whatever reason.
But and some of that goes into like, you kind of learn how the property sets up, how it lays out. Okay, oh, this road is over here. You can and you can do a lot of this from aerials as well. But I don't know. It's a little different when you get there.
Yeah, there's something about coming in up high that, especially in the conditions that we have there. Like when you come in down low in elevation, I do feel like your tendency of being seen, making more noise because you're usually like huffing it more. So you're not only are you breathing harder, but you're usually like having to grab onto stuff if you have to try and heave your way up something. It's more noisy. It's easier to see. And if you can come up high, you can kind of like tiptoe your way up to things. And I feel like your wind is also much less likely to sort of, when you're coming down low, your wind, I feel like, just follows up. But when you come in up high, you might get lucky and just have it kind of stay over the top. Yeah. I mean, that's just, this is all
time of day is going to play into that, and that's also going to be, and we took that into consideration, at least when we started, right? We're like, okay, the wind's pushing out of the north, so we're going to start on this side, try and keep it in our favor. But also I can, I guess, contradict myself and say, pretty tough to give up those first 2 draws that we could see up into. By starting from the bottom. So, I don't know.
But day 2, though, let's talk about that a little bit here. And I don't think anybody's going to be like, it's not going to be some super surprise that we have to wait to reveal. But we did end up being able to shoot one on day 2.
We got one.
We got one, everybody. So this wasn't, I feel like our minimum threshold on pod ventures is always, well, let's just not do as bad as we did on boats and bows. and this one we elevated ourselves pretty quickly above.
Yeah, it's probably that trip was like a blessing because you set the bar so like below low, like even whatever low is, like whatever the baseline of low, and then starting below that.
Yeah.
Boy, man, there's lots of room for
up, even with the marketing team here. I mean, that was our second pod venture. I remember everyone was like, "Are you guys sure you should be doing these?" But now it's like anything that comes out afterwards. Like, at least it's better than that one.
Almost like it was planned that way, Jim.
But all right, so we go out. This time we were in much more open country. I just, for whatever reason, looking around it, I remember liking it better. I remember as soon as we got there, and not only did it just look better for whatever reason, I liked the fact that it was open with these, what do they call them? Those big straight pockets of trees. What do they call them again?
They call them
Shelter
shelter breaks.
Shelter something. Yeah,
Shelter
breaks.
break, I think.
Shelter
Larry was
break.
calling
I just
them.
call them tree rows. But
Tree rows, yeah, something like that. But you had those on, occasionally in different spots, and you could see out really, really far away. And there was all these different shelter breaks, tree rows, whatever.
yeah,
kind of
if
all
you
over the
find a
landscape.
tree in this region of Nebraska, there's a high likelihood it was planted by somebody.
Yeah, and there's also a high.
Other than the cedars, which I think are kind of invasive. Like we saw that one field where they were actually, it looks like they're intentionally just hacking them down. And
oh yeah,
I've heard, I don't know, it's interesting. I don't know. I need to find more about those cedars because they offer a lot of cover and diversify the habitat, but I think they're also kind of overtaking some of that landscape.
when you see trees too out there, there's a pretty high likelihood that there's probably something living right in them or around them.
Yes.
Which is kind of nice because you can sort of rule out stuff really quickly. Whereas when we were in the really breaky stuff, it was like, well, what does it look like just over there? And then you pop up and you're like, oh no, that's not a good spot. Or like, oh, this could be awesome. But there you're pretty much like, you can pick and choose right off the bat if you just get a little elevation. But we went out. Let's talk about, I feel like, Mark, in our sets, we started to get a little bit into our rhythm with calling. Because you were running the caller, you were running the e-caller, and you had your mouth calls as well. Talk about your strategy out there, because I actually found it to be different than what you did the first day. The first day, we'd get to a spot, and it was like distress call would start, for the most part.
Yep.
The second day, you had a slightly different way of going about it that I think ended up really helping us a lot.
So, yeah, I mean, I think anytime on any hunt, like, you kind of got to feel your way through it, and you're going to try some things, do some A/B testing. You know, we could have found that the distress calls were just money, and anytime you hit the rabbit squealer, here they come a-running, right? They're so hungry, and it's just on fire, and that's all you need. And so, yeah, so we started predominantly with distress calls. I know some very accomplished coyote hunters that only use distress calls, right? And they do quite well. One thing that we did have in our favor was the breeding season that was going on. So the coyotes, you know, they're getting together, they're getting paired up, they're breeding. We saw some of this activity. Jim, I think you were a little bit shocked by it. We'll get to that a little bit later.
We'll get to that. I'm not shocked that coyotes breed. All right, let's just get.
I ended up having to do a lot of explaining to Jim in the truck about how these things work, but.
Just can't believe that's how they're made. No.
But, so yeah, day 2, we mixed it up, right? Something wasn't working. Let's try something a little different. So we did a couple different sets and started mixing in the coyote vocals. Tried a variety of them. You know, that Fox Pro collar has a lot of different sounds on them, and just trying to see, you know, try something, see if it sticks. And we eventually got to a point where we ripped out some howls. I want to believe it was, now I'm giving away all my trade secrets. The Lone Deep female howl was the one that ended up.
So now settings in an e-collar are like your hunting spots now, huh? Oh, I don't want to give away my my perfect e-collar.
Hey, I coughed it up.
You did. You
know,
begrudgingly.
And one thing, and again, and if you listen to our podcast with Matt McHugh, he talks about this. And really, I was just trying to mentally go through what we chatted about in the podcast with him, as far as, like, you know, those female sounds. They're not going to be intimidating in any way, very welcoming. Like, you're not going to, you know, if you do some super crazy aggressive male challenge, right? Like, you might get one, but you're kind of excluding, you know, some other folks.
Yeah, and the one you're probably going to get is something that's just like trying to be even more aggressive or more dominant, which doesn't come along as frequently as just the rest of them.
Right. And really, I mean, the goal was, I mean, you might get something to come into that, right? But also just to get an answer, just to find out where the heck these things are. I mean, it's almost like elk hunting, right? You know, you rip off a few bugles, and eventually you're like, well, there's one over there. Let's head that way, you know? Yep. And that's what happened. Excuse me. That's what happened there. We got a group to light up. And when I say group, there was a group of them down in there.
Yeah.
And
Cooper and I are still convinced there was 2 groups.
Yeah.
There was one that ended up being the direction that we went. And there was one, I swear. Now, of course, the other thing is, too, since you were shooting that break 6.5 Creed, we did have, like, I had ear pro loosely in and ready to just, like, finish popping all the way in if we saw something. And I don't think it was in my head. I don't think it was the wind howling, but I do think there was another group that was down to our left. The one that we really heard fire up was more to our right. And, yeah.
And that was, so you had a suppressor on your AR. The gun that I initially planned on using was threaded. I was going to huck a suppressor on that thing. And ideally, I mean, it's always a good idea to wear hearing protection where you shoot, even with a suppressor. It's not like they're super insane. It's not like they're 100% quiet, but you can kind of, in my opinion, get away with a little bit more as far as, not damaging your, at least blowing your eardrums out, right? But I didn't have that. And so I had my ear pro in as well, which was kind of a pain, right?
We'll talk more about suppressors in a bit.
Oh, gosh, they're great. So, yeah, we got this group fired up. Lots of dogs. Like you said, there might have been two different groups. The one that was, I guess, as we're the way we were oriented, to our left. And I think the wind was kind of blowing that way a little bit too. So that one, maybe it was over there and kind of got onto us. We called. I did have a feeling we were a little bit far away, but I kind of also wanted to see what would happen and see if we could get something to come in. And I didn't want to, press in too tight and then, blow it.
To describe it as well,
I guess I was like, well, they can hear us.
Yeah, we were on a fence row, and we were looking across some open stuff that I remember even thinking, like, 200 yards forward and to our left a little bit was also a group of hay bales, and we were thinking, like, one might even come squirting right out of those things. We didn't see that happen. But just looking at the landscape, it was very rolly, and it was a very miniature version of what we were in the day before because it was breaky, but it wasn't like really big hills. It was just big enough to maybe conceal like a coyote.
Much more subtle for sure.
Much more subtle, but it was still pretty rugged. There was a lot of stuff to hide in or behind or around. And I remember when we got up there, I was like, this just looks really... You don't even have to have hunted coyotes your entire life because obviously I haven't, but I remember getting up there and being like, I like this for some reason. And but to describe what we were looking at, as you went out a little bit further and further, I think it was probably about 400 yards maybe forward and to our right, it sort of dipped off, and then there was this unknown land between that dip and then another hill way, way off in the distance. So when we heard these things fired up, it was kind of coming from behind that. So it's hard to say if, like, well, are they just over the rise and they're about to come barreling over, or are they way off in the distance yet and that sound is just carrying across this open expanse?
Yep. And like you said, Jim, that spot was so cool because, well, we obviously knew we had those coyotes way off in the distance, but we had some cool trees and cover and some different habitat to our left. We had those hay bales. I've seen coyotes hang around hay bales looking for mice. I've seen them sitting on top of hay bales before. It just seemed too good to pass up to not give it a try right there. We could have had one that was 100 yards away that just came firing in and which ended up not happening. And then now I'm going through my memory bank. So I think we pushed in. Did we do one more set between that spot? No,
it was that spot. So you threw out the sort of lone female howl. We got them to respond back. You threw out, I think, maybe another howl or something just like that, and then basically we went to distress calls. And it was a lot like Matt was talking about because he was saying you play more on their mind than you do their stomach in this time of a year. So we were trying to set up the scenario where this lone female was out and about, kind of maybe encroaching in on another group of coyotes' territory. She let out some howls. They're either howling at her like, hey, whatever, we don't like you here, or we do like you here, who knows what, during that time of year. And but then all of a sudden she kills something.
Right.
And that's kind of what we're going for. And so that, when we started up the distress calls, that was when we didn't really hear the coyotes very much anymore, and we were just waiting on them to just come up over that rise. It just didn't really end up happening, and that's when you kind of said, like, I think we're not in their bubble yet.
Yep. And I truly do think that was the case. Yep.
And to that exact point, Jimmy, I mean, Mark, you and I have talked about this numerous times, but just being able to adapt on the fly, like you plan out every hunt, you have this vision of what it looks like. and rarely does it ever happen, you know. So like you guys had just said, you know, change the call from a distress to, you know, more coyote-based calling sequence the next day and just get in that bubble, you know.
Yep. So we moved. I bet we cut, I don't know, probably at least 1,000 yards off it, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
I bet we
came up over
cut it
that
in
rise.
half.
We came up over that rise, and we did again just see this super expansive, like just bowl within a big, long, gradual hill with some kind of you know breaky stuff and trees all along it across the way. We measured it at about, you know, midway up the hill was about 1,000 yards away. So we could see a long way.
Yeah, and got set up. Like we picked a spot before we called. We're like, okay, let's get to a spot where we have advantage, where we've got some shooting lanes, where we think these coyotes might come. We got set up. You got on your tripod. I didn't have my tripod. I wished I had my tripod.
Oh man, the tripod. We'll talk more about that in a second too.
A little foreshadowing there, and again, kind of go with what worked, you know. And at the previous set, we did try a couple different coyote vocalizations, and they did respond to both. But the one that they responded to initially, and also the one that I think I tried some male sounds after on that first set, and I think they responded, but they kind of shut down a little bit too. Like, and I was like, okay, maybe they responded, but they just didn't care for it. So we kind of went back to that lone female, and man, they fired up again. We got a beat on them. We're like, man, where are they? We're definitely closer. And then Jim, you spotted the first one.
Incredibly, I never see coyotes, and I actually spotted one,
which was a damn good spot because you're like, I mean, and actually it was perfect because that big green cedar, that lone cedar, like you couldn't have had a better landmark there just to the right of that. And I ranged to I want to say 1062.
Yep.
And then another one joined that one, and then another joined that one. Then all of a sudden there was a fourth, I believe, charging in with a high sense of urgency.
I've never seen anything go from that full of a sprint to that intensive amount in no time flat. It was just dead sprint. It was video game level stopping ability. Unbelievable. And I exclaimed something that it just came out.
Well, you were surprised.
Yeah.
I
can't believe they're doing that. I just wasn't expecting that.
That's kind of how you said it.
But anyway, I do remember though, like they fired up, and I remember thinking to myself, like, I was like, well, I'm probably not going to be the guy who spots this coyote, you know, when they're out here. You know, like Mark's going to see it, Cooper's going to see it, whatever. But I was looking through my scope. I had the Razor 1 to 10, and so I cranked it up to 10 power because I'm like, well, I kind of have an idea just based on the sound. They're coming from still pretty far out there. And I was like, I just feel like if a coyote's rip-roaring, making a bunch of sounds like these ones are, barking, howling, like I don't think coyotes just make that sound where they're just laying down and loafing under a tree. Maybe they do. I could be wrong. But I was like, it just sounds like they're up and, you know, moving. So I looked out and I was looking for something that was basically just up and moving. And it just happened to all of a sudden see something that didn't look like a rock or a tree. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's a coyote. And then all of a sudden there were four. And once we saw them, then that's when you switched to the distress call, right?
Yeah, and we'd been using the e-caller a lot with its distress sounds, and they work great. And I've used Fox Pros in the past and had really, really good luck with them with the e-calls. But it just seemed like in that setting, and I guess kind of like, I mean, that Fox Pro gets pretty loud, but I felt like I could get a little bit more volume with the hand calls, and I knew they were pretty far out. Like you said, we're talking at about 1062, which, in my coyote hunting experience, like I've seen them definitely come in from that far. So I knew it was possible, and I just started jumping on the rabbit squealer. Now at that point in time, like I kind of had to transition from my optics to the calls, so I couldn't really tell what they were doing. But Jim, Jim, you and Coop, like, what did you like? So when
Cooper
I went
to this the best, he actually had the best view on what they were doing.
So when I started ripping on that hand call, like, how did their behavior change? What happened there?
So when you started hitting that hand call, like obviously they were moving at a pretty good speed across that ridge top as it was, to try to catch up with that female. Obviously.
I mean, as
it's
we
that
know,
season,
yeah.
But they were on her, fairly quickly, and at that range, 1,000 yards out, I kind of lost them under a swale, and it would seem to be forever, but I know it wasn't. Maybe more than a couple minutes. I was looking straight out, towards that funnel where we anticipated all them coyotes to come just perfect. Like your guys' best shot opportunity, my best opportunity for good footage. But at about 300 yards out, I seen one lone coyote just hauling along that fence line.
Yeah.
And that's when I reached up to you, I believe, and I was like, Jimmy, he's coming from the left, or whatever, straight ahead. And it had to be a couple more minutes before he actually got.
It actually was, yeah. It was a little bit, because I remember you telling me that, and you were situated up a bit higher than I was, just only a little bit higher than I was, because I'm sitting off the tripod. So I was sitting down. I had the tripod splayed out. I was kind of like sitting inside the tripod a bit, and I had the gun pointed in such a way where I could aim it easily at that sort of funnel, and I had obviously then a little bit of articulation. And so I couldn't quite see that fence line that you were talking about, but from what you described, it sounded like he was hauling. And so I was expecting to see him any second, but it was weird how long it took. It's like he must have been hauling to a certain spot on that fence line where he determined like that's his cross spot. And then from there, he was like, "All right, now I'm behind enemy lines, so to speak. I gotta like go slow."
I almost wonder. There was not near severe as of a bull as what we had hiked through the day before and hunted over those sets, but I almost wonder, we were up on that high point, if our wind was maybe swirling down there and just maybe turned him off a little, and tried to make that loop back.
Could have been.
That chance.
That could have been, or maybe, they definitely, I was shocked that they didn't come straight up the pipe.
Yeah.
When you said, and if hopefully at some point they'll get to see the footage. But when you're like, he's coming from the left, I thought he was going to funnel right up that bottom like water. I was like, it's almost like it's the most cover for them. They're going to be hidden all the way up. This is where the sound is coming from. Now, granted, I can definitely see them trying to get downwind of it, and that's probably what the direction where they came from. But I was so hyper focused on that area. It was the best place that I could see. Is where you said that they were coming from. Yep. It was directly in line with kind of how they were when we saw them, super far away. And I was also laying prone. And so there was kind of some of that higher brush that ended up being like right in my line of sight to where that dog poked its head up, Jim. But I actually even wonder, I'm not sure I would have even been able to see it at the time that you shot had there not been that brush there, just because of the roll of the hill and the fact that I was proned out. I mean, I was rock solid. If something came up the pipe, like, they were in trouble. But I was having trouble, or I would have had trouble seeing where they actually did come from.
Yeah, it was very strange the way that they popped up, because to try and explain it, we were sitting just immediately to the left of like where the funnel got really skinny, and then it kind of protruded out from us forward. There was a fence line, and then it just sort of gradually got bigger like a funnel does until it opened up into a bigger bowl that was probably 250-ish yards away. And that was where we kept expecting them to pop out and be running up. But immediately forward of us, as you kind of came up out of that funnel that was down low, there was this kind of flat ground that was across from the fence, and it was just kind of like a little plateau up there, and it had a lot of brush on it, but it was at about 150 yards, between 100 and 150 yards away. And I was looking in that funnel the whole time, and I'm waiting for there was this nice big white patch of snow that Cooper was saying that thing was basically on just an absolute bead for. And I can't remember what caused me to look away, but I kind of just like glanced to my left a little bit, and I saw a movement, and up pops this coyote on this like higher flat to the left of that funnel. And I just saw his kind of little head come up a little bit. I saw his pointy ears, and he walked out just a smidge until he was about even with me, and then he looked over to his right. And we're sitting there, obviously the one difficult thing you got when you're trying to video a hunt is that you've got a tripod, right? So I don't know if he saw maybe the tripod that Cooper had. I mean, Cooper didn't have it at standing height, for Pete's sake, but it's still just something that probably he's not used to seeing there.
We were a little bit exposed there. I mean, it was almost impossible not to be. That country was so open.
Yeah, but he did. He just glanced over to his right, and I remember saying, like, I got him. And this is where the beauty of the dang tripod comes into play. I love the tripod now so much because I had my AR just via that handguard. I kind of had it in a saddle mount right atop the Radian carbon tripod that we have. And I had the one with the leveling head, so it was just a quick twist to unlock. I swung it right over onto him, and it's so steady. There's no like, oh, I swung too far to the left. Now I got to come back to the right. Now I got to steady it out. It was just boop, no, right on him. He looked at me, put the crosshairs, because I knew he was within around that 200-yard mark, and being zeroed at 50 yards with an AR, I was like, well, we got a pretty good shot when he's straight on. My elevation isn't going to be a huge deal. So basically put the crosshairs at like neck level, base of his neck, and pulled the trigger. And it was, you even remarked, Mark, that you were like pretty uneasy because of how fast it happened. I mean, I was basically like, oh, I got one. I mean, it was...
It might have even been faster than that. I can't remember exactly what you said. I think it might have been like, there he is, or I see one, but it was like, there he is, boom. And I'm like, oh, Jim, you rushed it. You rushed the shot. Damn it, you rushed the shot. Like, but I also know you're a really good shot too, and you're not going to just like, just full send, like not aim, right? Mm-hmm. So I was like, I was super optimistic, but I was like, it was just so fast. Like, yeah. The way it was nearly instantaneous.
It felt fast for me too, and it was part of the reason why I think there was actually even a bit of, despite how quick it happened, I could have even pulled the trigger a bit quicker, but I got on the coyote so fast that even I was like, something feels wrong. Right. That was too fast.
Oh,
and then
here.
I was like, okay, wait, no, he's got to go or else he's going to spook. So I pulled the trigger. But like I heard a good thud. Mm-hmm. And I remember telling you guys that. I was like, did you guys see that? Anybody else see that? And like Coop, I don't know if you saw it because you were looking in a different direction.
I heard the shot. Okay. Impact, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah, all right. Mark was down low though, and he's, he didn't quite see it. And yeah. I'm like, I heard a thud. Coop, you're like, yeah, I think so. And Mark's like, I don't know. We sat there a little bit. You tried blowing on the call a bit more to see if we could get something else to come in because I was shooting suppressed, so it wasn't a big event, if you will, when my gun went off. It was, you still get the supersonic crack because it's 5.56. I wasn't shooting subs or anything, but it's not. I mean, it's a pleasant sound, if you will.
For sure, yeah. And so you shot. I actually went immediately to go to my like a pup distress hand call, which the reed was filled with snow, so that didn't work. And so then I just went back to the rabbit squealer, and because keep in mind, and again, did it work this time? No, as far as like calling in a double, but you shot suppressed. Like it's a different sound. It's not that big boom, like with that breaky 6.5 that if I'd, taken a shot. And I thought we had a legitimate good chance of having one of those other dogs, keep coming in. That didn't happen. Also, we did see one of the dogs, or Cooper, or both you guys did, running away from where Jim shot. And that's also what started playing tricks in my mind. I'm like, God, is that him? Did he just turn tail and zip out of there?
Yeah.
I think come to find out, we'd actually called in a pair.
Yeah, Coop, you went back. I actually haven't seen this footage yet. But you went back and you saw a second coyote. Because as soon as I saw the one move, my focus was keyed in on that one guy. And then obviously I'm in the scope and I took the shot. But you said that there actually was a second one kind of up in that same area, huh?
Yeah, there was two, and that actually had came. Mark, I know you've seen those mule deer that had been pretty much behind us a little ways.
Yep.
And that ridge kind of ran back towards them, and in that frame of your angle on that shot, the two coyotes, in fact, almost like they kind of come from behind us. I mean, they were absolutely using that wind to try to get to some sort of vantage, for sure. Yep.
They're so crafty.
Yeah, they are. It was amazing to see the footage, because I seen the one you shot for a half a second, just like you, and little did we know the whole time there was another one standing there.
That's so wild.
Yeah.
I'd love to have had like some sort of bird's eye where we could have seen the path they took all the way in, and did they actually get up in behind us and then cut down and back?
Yeah, aerial view with a John Madden yellow pen all over following their
And that's just part of the fun, trying to figure these darn things out. But we got one.
We got one.
We eventually walked down there. Jim, you had high confidence. You're like, I can't have missed this thing.
We dumped him. I mean, it's a good feeling anytime you're hunting anything when you just know that you just didn't waste any time. Boom. And yeah, you could tell like basically right where I recalled him being when I took the shot was where he was when we walked up on him, and it didn't really take any searching at all. So, yeah, he went down, and super cool. I mean, it was really, really awesome to see. It was cool to see everything work out. Like I explained before, I built that AR like 4 years ago or something like that. And so a build that I hadn't really shot a whole lot for a long time. Then we have these new tripods that come out. I was learning how to use that along the way. We're on this pod venture. Never hunted coyotes before. Terrible at even spotting them. And then they're laid one. Wild to see how not large they are. I remember that was one of the things. Everybody always talks about how coyotes really aren't that big.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you actually see one up close, you're like, yeah, that's really not that big. I mean, I've got a couple of dogs that I always look at as medium-sized, smaller, slender dogs. I'm thinking, yep, you guys are basically coyote-sized, you know?
Yep. I'd say, I guess I'm no coyote biologist, but I think, it was a male.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was probably like, it was an adult, but probably like a younger male.
Yep.
I think probably some, so, I think they definitely get bigger than that. That was obviously like I said, a full-size adult. Furred up real nice. Which one of the really cool, interesting parts of the podcast we did with Greg,
mm-hmm.
and some of the video that you shot, Cooper, was he had hides running the gamut from, basically throwaway to super prime, right?
In different regions of the country.
Different regions of the country, so we got some color variations there. But really cool for him to kind of go through what makes a good hide, with the guard hairs, with, some, I guess discoloration in certain regions of the hide, depending on time of year, things like that. And from what I learned from that, looking at that one that you shot, I'm like, this thing looks like a pretty darn nice coyote.
I think it was a pretty prime hide on him because, all the guard hairs were there and even all the way around, not just on the back, on the sides too.
Right.
And his chest was not, granted, I did put a hole in it, but Greg said it's not a huge deal if you do.
No.
And, a little bit of blood too just comes right out. So, but the chest was really nice as well. It wasn't like he'd been itching it and getting it all scratched up and exposing all that kind of like, I call it like dove-colored fur underneath,
Oh, sure.
The grayish stuff.
And I think some of that could be with the terrain, right? Like where we ended up getting on those dogs, like they're not going through like crazy like cockleburs and thistles
it's pretty
and
open.
thick brush, So they could be bedding in the snow, which that can pull some hair out, some of those guard hairs and things like that. Which they really didn't have a choice. Like they were bedding in the snow. There was a lot of snow out there, but overall, though, pretty solid looking dog.
Yeah. Then we took it back and we tried to skin it there, which was an interesting process. I think in hindsight, we'd have just, being that it was still minus 18 that day as well. So just keep that in mind. Successful coyote hunt, called some in. It was minus 18. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Cold as balls. But anyway, probably in hindsight would have just let him freeze and then thaw and work on him at home.
Yeah, I think.
Would you say
that? I would say that, Jim. That probably would have been optimal. I thought we had enough things to get it done and do a good job. Part of my thought process there was like it still was a little bit warm. It had cooled down quite a bit.
Yeah, we just had a long drag back.
Right. Probably should have brought it back home and like you said in hindsight, but. My thinking there was it's a little bit warm. It's going to peel easier. I've tried to skin frozen animals before.
Well, and that's just what we ended up doing is skinning a frozen animal. He cooled down on the drag back, and then we got him there finally to the truck, and we found a tree that we could hang him in and all that stuff, and it was just like by that point he was cold, and it was so cold outside that if you started to expose anything underneath that fur, you'd get the legs peeled back, and literally it was like what you were once grabbing onto that was pliable, flesh as you're skinning it down. You go to do one thing for 10 seconds, you go back to it, and you're like, oh, that's stiff. That's basically ice now.
It was nearly freezing instantly. So, and I've I guess full disclosure, like never case skinned. Like I've shot a fair amount of coyotes, but anytime we've even dropped them off, like we talked about with Greg, which is getting a little bit more rare, just dropped them off in the round if you wanted to get a little bit of money for it. Or I've flat skinned a couple of them, like you might like a bear rug. Like I fully tanned one time that actually turned out okay, but I just hadn't case skinned one before. So a little bit of a learning curve there. Some things I'd do differently next time. It had actually been a while since I'd worked on a coyote, and very different than a deer. Like that hide is quite a bit thinner. You got to be pretty careful with that knife. So I don't know. I mean, learning by doing though, right? Like I kind of have this, I guess this, not vendetta, but like I want to get good at skinning and getting coyotes put up. Like that's a goal of mine here in the near future, or at least next winter, is to get to the point where like super proficient.
Yep. Navigating that cold, I'll tell you one thing. We did a podcast a while back on how cold weather affects your gear, and I mean I did actually wind up putting a lot of that stuff into practice. I mean, something that's just so easy to overlook is your optics in the cold and external fog, right? It's like external fog, right? I can't tell you how many times I was sitting there looking, the call's going, especially on that second day when we started to get some activity, getting real excited, start breathing a little heavy. I maybe pulled the balaclava down for a little bit, start breathing a little heavy, and I look down at my eyepiece, and I've just breathed all this fog onto the eyepiece, which is now like freezing to the eyepiece. And I'm like, dang it, like trying to clean that off. And, or you set something down in the snow and it falls over, and now you got snow all over your optics, all over the glass, and you're like, stupid, and you're trying to get it out of there, but then it's smudging. And I mean, it was a constant process of trying to keep the exterior surfaces of the glass in good shape, and then, not getting super wet and smudgy or frosted, and then also trying not to freeze to death.
Yes.
There was that, too. You got to drink a lot of water. I mean, it's not that you have to just drink more water than you would if you're on a regular hunt. You just have to realize that for whatever reason, your body just doesn't tell you it's thirsty when it's that cold out.
No.
I mean, we were like huffing it on those hills on the first day for a long time, like half a day. Finally, we get around to like noon 30 or something like that. I'm thinking, I haven't had one drink of water, and we've been like worked.
Well, and
on
you're
those
like,
hills.
you drink water all day, Jim.
I do. I drink a lot of water.
On the daily, you like are always drinking water. And like you said, you kind of got to force yourself to remember to do that, because you do need it. You are sweating still, some of those hills. That's the other tricky thing too, is trying to regulate your temperature and not work so hard that you completely get, drenched from the inside out. Then you go sit down for 5 minutes and
Coop
freeze.
was soaked.
Yep, that's kind of the way I rolled. But it was we had it timed out enough, half hour rough sit, whatever. It was, by the time I would get a slight bit chilly, we were already moving again, so it was definitely made the process easier to stay warm for sure.
Yeah. For someone who's a bit more of an impatient hunter, I do like coyote hunting a lot, because if you sit there for 30 minutes and you call, it's like you can move, and it's acceptable to do so.
Yeah. On to the next spot.
Whereas when you're in the whitetail season and I sit in a spot for 30 minutes, I'm like, I think I'm going to go still hunting. It's like usually not that acceptable.
It's like, I'm going to go still hunt. Jim, you've got 20 acres to work with,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, having a mix of e-calls and hand calls, I would, like I said, I don't claim to be any like expert coyote hunter, but I've shot enough of them, called enough of them in. The guy you want to listen to is Matt in our previous podcast,
undoubtedly.
Or Dustin. We did a really good one with Dustin Butler.
Oh yeah,
too.
that's right.
So we've got a couple of really good calling podcasts that people should look back on, and they can probably learn a lot more than from us here right now. But having that mix of e-caller and hand calls, man, I just think that's really, really a good tip. It increases your versatility. You can certainly make coyote vocalizations with hound calls. I mean, there's howlers and things like that. I do think that they're tough to duplicate as well as the e-caller does. I mean, those are actual recordings of coyotes making those sounds extremely, extremely convincing. But being able to transition to the hand calls, I think you can get some extra emotion put into those hand calls. You can manipulate them. You can
customize a little bit, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a sound that they probably haven't heard before, just because you can customize it. You can control the volume really, really well. If you have multiple calls, they're going to all have a little bit of different sound. You can mix it up. You got open read, closed read. I don't know.
But I tell you what,
me, Jim. The more gear, the better.
Oh yeah, that's how it always works. Speaking of just the how good those e-collars sound though when you're doing the house. I mean, so we mixed it up. We went to Nebraska for this hunt that we're talking about, but then we also came back and we decided to go out locally. And we talk about Wisconsin a lot here because that's where we are. And Wisconsin, I think, is a fantastic place. But anyway, we decided to go out, try and shoot a Wisconsin dog or two. And an interesting experience that was. We went out to a spot. It's actually the outdoor range facility for Vortex Edge, but it's got plenty of room there. And got dogs that hear a lot of gunshots.
Yes.
So we thought maybe that would come in handy too if Mark wasn't using something that was suppressed. Oh, but you were.
I was.
You were. Mark has an AR.
Jim, it fell off the boat. It's at the bottom of the ocean.
Oh, right. Sorry. Mark doesn't have an AR. He lost it in a boating accident. But wink,
I
nudge,
was
nudge.
using
He was
it last
using an
week.
AR with a suppressor on it.
Yep, borrowed a suppressor, and it was super cool. I mean, this coyote trip really, number one, since I was able to relate my AR to hunting, it lit a fire to actually finish it up and get it done. It is.
He found those 2 roll pins.
Nearly purpose built for hunting at this point. In fact, it's very, very similar to the AR that you have, Jim. We got the suppressor on. This hunt rekindled my passion for chasing coyotes. I really haven't done it a whole lot since I moved to Wisconsin. When I lived in Nebraska, we'd do it a lot more, and I think maybe that was some of the reasons why I wanted to go back there and hunt coyotes, because I just like hunting coyotes in that state. Because I like the terrain.
We're kind of bit by the dog bug right now.
Yeah, we might be putting up some more fur here next winter.
That's the idea. But what a crazy experience, though, that one was. I mean, you just talk about all these different ways that a coyote can get you. And there was even some lessons learned, I'd say, in that takeaway. We'll just explain that briefly. We went out on a day that was a balming 15 degrees. And
after work,
so we had basically enough time for one set before it was just pitch black. And we decided in this particular case to be stick using mostly day optics to, because we were still kind of on the offshoot of this pod venture here. And I forgot my stinking tripod, which I just raved about so much. But it was it's a local hunt. That's one thing about local hunts. Sometimes they're real quick, kick around after work, try and jet out, is you just take so much for granted.
You kind of half-ass it a little bit.
You do. You're like, oh yeah, it's 20 minutes away where we're going to go. So whatever. And then all of a sudden you're on your way and you're like, I don't have a tripod. I didn't have my magazine with me, so I had to borrow a magazine. I mean, it was just I looked like an idiot, which I do a lot. But
a week after our original coyote hunt, I've got a brand new, fully set up, sighted in AR with a tripod.
Yeah. But, man, those coyote vocalizations that we used out there, I remember, and like I said, my segue here was how realistic those things sound. I heard the same coyote vocalizations we're using out there. You used a lone female. Mm-hmm. We kind of set it up out in the middle of this open bowl. There's trees that just wrap all the way around this bowl at the very end of the firing range there. And almost immediately, another one fired up in response. And I actually remember thinking, when I heard that other dog fire up, a real one, in response to your e-collar, I was like, no, someone else is out here with an e-collar, and they're just messing with us. Because it sounded just like the e-collar. And I couldn't believe how, it was really cool. And it was so crisp, the sound that dog was making. It was so just unaltered by terrain or whatever, not echoey or anything. It was just boom, it was right there.
It was close.
And it was close. And I was like, that sounds fake.
And by close, I bet that dog was probably about 1,000 yards away too.
You think?
Would be my guess.
Yeah, could be.
What do you think it is all the way to the opposite side up on that hill, Jim? Should have ranged it. Could have ranged it.
We should have, could have. Maybe 1,000. Yeah, 800 to 1,000.
Yeah.
But man, the way he started coming in, though, we waited a while. You started the distress calls after you got him fired up a bit. Then you started the distress call.
So yeah, and I think that's one thing. So it worked. Got it to sound off, right? So now we know where it is.
Yeah.
And then got it to sound off again. Got it to sound off again. And now I debated kind of transitioning to maybe a different sound that might more might be a little bit more of a challenge, or maybe add some urgency to it to see about calling it in to, investigate this dog that's either might be a potential mate or, be on its turf or whatever. Ultimately, though, I went with what you talked about, Matt's technique of, hey, let's just pretend we got this lone female over here. We know we've got another dog over here, and bam, now she's caught something. Now she's got food. And so that's what we tried to do. And this time, stuck with just the e-collar. Jim was talking a little bit about the setup before. So we had this, we were tucked into a brushy tree line, but you had to be on the outer edge of it. You just weren't going to be able to shoot through that brush. There was just too much brush. So we were on the edge, so we're tucked into it. So we were kind of nothing in our foreground, but open field. And then we're backed up, so we've got some back cover. So we're concealed, but concealed but exposed. So what I didn't want to do is just because, like, when I use hand calls, you're moving your hands, manipulating the call. I wanted to have as least motion as possible. So we went straight with the e-collar and the Coyote vocals and the distress downs off the e-collar. And again,
a little electric bouncing rabbit thing that Jackrabbit Dan gave us on our way out.
Yeah, Dan was there finishing up a training. Apparently he keeps a rabbit decoy in his truck like any good person should do. So we borrowed that and hooked that out by the e-collar. And, whether it helped or
just
didn't
to provide
help,
maybe a bit of distraction from us, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I tell you one thing, though. Again, it took longer for the dog to come at us than I expected. Similarly to Nebraska, I'd say that, like when Cooper was like, that thing's coming in on a line, then it just took a while to finally see him. So I remember that dog was fired up, then he started doing the distress calls, and I'm like, we're going to see him literally in 2 seconds.
I'd be curious to know how much time actually passed.
Coop could probably end up telling us once he goes back and looks at the footage. But, I mean, it took a
10
minute
minutes,
for him
maybe?
to show up.
The second dog? Are we talking?
We're talking about the Wisconsin dog.
Oh,
the
yeah.
Wisconsin
I would
dog.
say, I know you and Adrian had seen him well before Mark and I did, and I would say, I got the lens on him. I used probably 400 to 500 yards out.
Yeah.
And I think you guys could see just around the bend just a little bit further.
And it just took him a while to finally get out there.
Yep.
But when he did,
was he on that tree line the whole way though? Because when I first, whenever I first saw him, was basically the first point that I would have been able to see him as he paralleled that tree line.
There is a 2-track that runs along the tree line. So if you can imagine, we're looking across this bowl, and then the bowl kind of comes around to a tree line that then goes basically on away from us. And there's a 2-track that goes along it. And he was out in the open on that 2-track, wide open as could be. I mean, close-ish to the tree line, if you will, but I mean, as close as a tractor needs to be to not run into the trees. So, you could see him plain as day. And,
was he around the corner, though, when you first saw him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so he was up, and then eventually that 2-track kind of goes off, and then there's just a ton of trees, and you're just way off in the trees. So that's where he popped out of. Mm-hmm. So anyways, this coyote comes running down, and when he first popped out, I remember Adrian had his Furies out, and Adrian ranged him at 550 or something like that. And so, but he was on a line down that 2-track. And so if he would have just followed that line, basically his trajectory, if he wouldn't have moved, he would have eventually just run straight at Adrian. But he would have had to come down and turn just a bit into that big open bowl to get to where our sound was coming from. And he's running, and then he kind of stopped. And then I remember he looked around for a little bit, and he's kind of wondering what was up. And he stopped, and I remember thinking he's still too far away. This was about actually where he stopped was about the 500-yard mark. Where he first popped out was a little bit further than that. So then he carried on, though. He started moving a little bit further, and then finally at the very edge, it's a 90-degree angle as he's getting right out into where it would open up into this big bowl. I remember that he stopped there, and he looked around at all this open area in front of him, and he stopped for so long. And it's so dumb because all three of us, Mark, Adrian, myself, Cooper, so 4, even though Cooper wasn't on a gun at the time, all of us could see him. I had my crosshairs on him. He was dead to rights. But the lesson learned is that every single one of us with my AR is shooting quarter minute. Mark, your AR is shooting half minute. Adrian is former SWAT sniper, one of the instructors at Edge. He's got a 308 that's shooting quarter minute. all of us would have had that dog dropped in its spot. But
Confidence level was high.
we wanted to see so badly him come into the call, so then, we could just make an even shorter shot. I guess it would have been like really awesome to see unfold, right?
Right.
But
Well, it's kind of like, it's like, why shoot him at 250 when we can shoot him at 10,
it's so true.
And I've watched, coyotes come in similarly, like, stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. And I'm like, and in my mind, I'm like, this guy is committed.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just showing really I think they're always cautious, right? I mean, sometimes I guess they'll just go full tilt, like, suicide mission. But I was like, no, like, there's no reason to shoot this dog right now. Like, he's going to cross this little dip. He's going to come up the other side.
I was chomping.
And I was...
Cooper was telling me to shoot.
Cooper was. And I remember sitting there like, well, I shot the one in Nebraska. I'm like, Mark's got to shoot this one. And then I remember like thinking, based on where you were, I thought, well, maybe Mark can't see him just because of his angle. And I was... Well, Adrian's there. Adrian can almost certainly see him, and Adrian hasn't shot yet. So maybe I just shouldn't shoot. I had him in my crosshairs. It was about as steady as I could be, like off of a tree. Gun wasn't moving. Crosshairs were right there again, like right basically at neck level because he was facing right on us. And I thought, well, I'll let it happen. We'll see what happens. And he started to run again. I remember he took about 2 bounds, and it was as though there was an invisible line at the very edge of the trees. The edge of the trees, it made like a 90-degree angle between the tree line he was on and the tree line that ended up pooching out and going around this big bowl. It was as though his nose touched that invisible line.
Oh, it was as if he hit an electric fence.
Again, coyotes with their video game level physics. Just 90 degrees into the trees, and it was like, uh-oh. And I thought, well, maybe he's trying to get downwind. He's trying to do a big loop circle, and then maybe he'll still pop out over there. And, I'm like, yeah, I bet that's what Mark's thinking. Mark's totally got this under control. He's hunted more coyotes than I have. And I bet that's what Adrian's thinking too, because Adrian hunts coyotes a lot as well. But, I will just watch this play out. He went into the trees, and I was still following him in the scope. And then he went into this opening in the trees, and I remember that he stopped there, and he looked back at the collar one more time. And then I saw his head turn completely away from the collar, and he had like very much body language, like he was done.
He was getting out of Dodge.
And that was where I was like, I'm done with this waiting stuff. And I ripped off a shot. And gosh darn it, if it just would have been an inch lower. Cooper has on film. You saw it, right, Mark?
Yeah.
Grazed his back. You can actually see like the shock wave of his back kind of go up and down, and then graze his back. We caught a little bit of blood.
Followed it for probably 300-400 yards. Cut blood in the snow.
But I mean,
when he started
300
going up,
yards away, he was full bound still.
Straight uphill.
Uphill.
Yeah.
Like he was not like. I'm sure it stung. He didn't like it, but he got like literally his PhD that afternoon, and I'm convinced he's still running.
I like to joke about it, but yes, I think he's still running as well.
Yeah,
for sure.
I know everybody likes to say, no, he's going to be okay. Like, I think he's going to be okay.
1 inch lower, though.
Done, for sure.
I mean, just unbelievable.
I think
that was about 300 yards, though, and I just, like, I don't know. I think that I got a little excited when I saw...
If you had your tripod.
I actually think if I had my tripod, it just would have been that much more steady.
Mm-hmm.
I was off of a tree. Stupid tree.
I could shoot really well the way I had my tripod positioned, really well straight away and a little bit to the right. And I was trying to just, make some final adjustments. And, of course, he's weaving in out of the trees, and you're trying to, get that sight picture. And I just wasn't – I was just like, if I had gotten on him, like, the shooting needed to start there. But,
yeah. I can picture it now how you were set up.
So in hindsight, yeah, any one of us should have drilled him when he was, sitting – at 250. If you put me in the same scenario again, but like a different coyote, I'd have a hard time trying to. It's like, and I'm no master goose hunter either, but it's like, oh man, like why shoot them on this pass when you can shoot them with their little black feet dangling in your face? Like that's part of the fun of it. That's part of the challenge. It's really cool to have those up close encounters. Had we shot, we might have another coyote to try skinning out. But
I'll tell you what, one thing, and I'll mention this too as we kind of like get towards the end. Talk about tripods a little bit more too, because I had a learning experience, a learning curve to get through with my tripod. We went out there with the radiant carbon because I was hucking that thing around, and I'd never used one before, and I learned a lot. And luckily, we ended up having the encounter that we had with the coyote that I shot at the end of our 2 days. Because I think at the beginning, I just wasn't that good with the tripod yet. I hadn't had enough time behind it.
Just manipulating the legs and angles. And
I think a lot of times people, in the way even probably we've talked about tripods, the way other people talk about tripods, is that it's like this, you stick your gun on a tripod and instantly there's nothing you need to think about. You're a master, right? Like everything is just easy from there. But it actually is, it's a little bit tricky to figure out at first. One is you got to figure out, for me, it was even figuring out, okay, what way do I need to twist the thing in order to unlock it versus locking it? And obviously that's just a lefty-loosey motion, but on the leveling tripod, the fastener or the lever that you're unscrewing or you're screwing in to tighten and loosen is facing upward. So if you're thinking lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, but you're looking down at it, it's actually righty-loosey, lefty-tighty,
Okay, yeah.
Even though, anyway. So I was dealing with that a little bit. I finally figured it out, okay, if I twist my wrist that way, it's locked. If I twist my wrist that way, it's unlocked. But there was that aspect. And then there was also just figuring out how you're going to get in the legs and how you're going to have the head set up and where you want to be. And one thing that I had to learn pretty quick when we were getting set up on a few of our spots, and you get set up on a set, and as you're kind of trying to get the e-collar set up somewhere or whatever, I'm trying to figure out, okay, I'm looking through certain things, seeing what my lanes are like, shooting lanes. And one thing I learned was that, especially with the leveling head, and I know the ball head has a bit more articulation. You can move the ball head more before essentially running out of its available travel, for just to use terms that we use all the time in scopes with turrets. You get a little bit more articulation with the ball head, but the leveling head's just one thing to loosen and tighten. It's a little bit maybe more intuitive. It's a little bit more stable, a little bit more low center of gravity. But you can sort of run out of its travel potentially,
right?
Mostly up and down. And when we were in that really breaky country, that was one thing you had to consider. So what I would do is I would get the tripod's legs set up in such a way that when I was looking at a spot where I felt coyotes were most likely to come out, the leveling head was at the absolute center of its travel. So that way, if something was a little bit lower or a little bit higher, I had the max amount that the leveling head could articulate to adjust lower or higher. And then also you want to try and get yourself in a position where you can go left or right. It's really easy to have the tripod set up maybe to your right so you can look to the right really easily, but to look to the left, you have to crane around it.
That's what how I had set up on that Wisconsin dog. And yeah, I was having to, even though it was pretty much straight, but it was a little bit to my left. So then I was and then when we went further left, I just didn't have that optimal positioning.
Yeah, you got to kind of practice a lot of it and figure out what way to set the legs and where your body is and how you're going to interact with the tripod and the gun. You got to practice it so that way you can set it up right. But eventually I kind of had the idea down where, I set the legs up almost like they're the tripod's own 20 MOA base, right? You can cheat in this elevation or whatever to the tripod's head so that way you're not going to run out depending on where a coyote might pop out. And you can figure out where to set yourself inside the tripod or next to the tripod or maybe kneeling behind a tripod. I actually really started to like doing.
Okay.
Because if you could kneel behind it, then you weren't confined to having your legs intertwined in it.
Right.
So that way, if you had to move to the side, it was just a quick knee shuffle instead of come uncrisscross applesauce and all that.
God, it just seems like a way to get your legs to fall asleep, though.
Oh, mine did. Yeah, and I just I'd be kneeling there for a long time, and I'm like, I can't feel my toes anymore. And I'd be like, well, that's good for now, but I know as soon as I move, I'm going to get that pins and needles feeling. But yeah, that kind of happens. If you can actually, though, if you can kneel behind the tripod, but instead of kneeling, and a lot of people will sit on their heels with their toes on the ground.
Right.
If you can actually sort of come up on your knees and then brace your arm into the tripod leg and then actually lean into the gun, then you still get a little blood flow to your toes and don't fall asleep as quickly.
But
then you got to have, good cover to be behind. So
right.
it is having a tripod on you and with you isn't an automatic thing. I wouldn't have anybody go out there and get it and think like, oh, it's this magical wand that if I have it with me, it's just going to make everything better. It's like, no, it's really awesome, but you have to learn how to use it properly. Or else it's going to actually be a hindrance.
Yeah, you kind of did a little tripod by fire. I guess I did the
I did the same
thing.
Yeah.
It may have cost me a coyote, Jim. I was like, had I been faster.
And had we had more time. I mean, that one, like when we were in Nebraska, it wasn't our first set that a coyote came out.
No.
We were here, it did. So, anyway, that's my PSA, if you will, on tripods. Coop, we made it, though.
We did.
You didn't freeze. Totally.
We made it.
I mean, like to death or anything.
It was cold, but it was a great trip.
We all got snowblind.
Very snowblind, sore eyeballs, pretty much every night after we got back. But it was a great trip. Learned a bunch.
Like I said,
all good.
As we started out, does it seem asinine to drive 10 hours to go hunt coyotes in the freezing, ice, whatever, man? It was cold. Yeah, it does. Was it super fun? Yes. I mean, did we go out literally an hour after work and encounter the same number of coyotes? Maybe.
It is what it is.
It happens. So yeah, but I think if we learned, if there's one big takeaway from this, it's that you should definitely try it.
Super
That's not
fun.
always the takeaway. That's like such a cliche takeaway,
Yeah,
right?
try
I mean,
it.
you just, oh yeah, try it. Just go out and do it, right? But just jump in.
I'd say don't be afraid to fail. Not that we failed. We just kind of adapted on the fly, and it ended up working out for us. So,
Yeah, I'd say I learned that coyote hunting, the way everyone makes it seem, is that you basically just walk anywhere, strike up a caller, and they literally come in like dementors or something. Just wah. It's not the case. Got to have a little bit more patience, a little bit more finesse to it, a little bit more. Coyotes aren't necessarily all just coming in like rabid beasts. They are very crafty. They can. I mean, this is what I've heard. I've seen it happen in videos. I haven't experienced it, but I do recall with these instances that we've had, it's been very shocking for me to see how patient a coyote can be and how crafty they can be.
very stealthy.
I'd say more often than not, at least in my experience, with the way they come in is how these two came in.
Same here.
Stop, go, look, cautious, using the terrain, trying to get downwind, putting all their senses to work, and which is what makes it so fun. And maybe we saved a few turkey poults, Jim.
Maybe so.
Maybe we saved a few deer fawns.
We can only
Never
hope.
know.
All right, everybody. Well, there you have it. That's the end of this particular pod venture. We ended up calling it. We decided on the name. Ice Dog
Millionaire, baby.
I don't think we're going to become millionaires off of this one
No.
pelt, but
Yet.
we did get an Ice Dog, that's for sure. Let us know what you think. As usual, hit us up in the comments, all that below, or on Instagram, and tell us about your own coyote adventures. We would love to hear about that. Stay tuned too, because Cooper's putting in a lot of work on the old video, so head on over. I think it's going to end up on the main Vortex Optics YouTube channel. That's usually how it works, but check it out. You'll be able to see all this stuff with your own eyes instead of just hearing the description. So check that out. All right.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Coop.
Bye,
guys.
everyone. There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.